Hello, everyone. This is Vikram Prakash, and you are listening to Architecture Talk, this podcast dedicated to advancing the frontier of architectural thinking. We are in depth conversations with a variety of interesting people from a multiplicity of disciplines. Today, I am talking to Jan Schmidt-Garre, a filmmaker from Germany whose film on B.V. Doshi, the Indian Pritzker Prize winning architect who recently passed away, was shown at the ADFF, the Architecture and Design Film Festival, that is actually ongoing in various cities in 2023-24. I happened to be in Vancouver when this film was shown and ended up introducing it, and then I followed up with Kyle, the director of ADFF, and got in touch with Jan to record this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. It's a timely conversation so soon after the passing of B.V. Doshi, and it gets into the whole experience that Jan had on working closely with Doshi in his very last years. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go.
Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
All right. Well, welcome to Architecture Talk, Jan. It's such a pleasure to be having this conversation with you. I was recently at the ADFF, the Architecture Design Film Festival in Vancouver, and I was looking at the lineup and I thought, wow, this film on Doshi, B.V. Doshi, the Indian architect who passed away recently, a man I knew quite well, and of course, whose architecture I was really familiar with. And I asked Kyle if I could preview the film, and he was very generous and gave me an advance access to the film. And I loved it so much, I ended up introducing the film at the festival. So first, I want to congratulate you and thank you for making the film,
Thank you.
which I enjoyed very much. And you are a filmmaker, Jan. I have a lot of questions for you, but let's just start with some basics. How did you end up in Ahmedabad making this film on Doshi? How did this come about in your oeuvre, in the kind of work you do?
Yeah, there were many chances coming together. I mostly do films on musical subjects and on sometimes also on the arts, but I never did anything on architecture. And one day I was jogging in Munich, and I was jogging through a nice neighborhood which was built in the 1970s for the Olympics. It's where the sportsmen stayed, and now it's a neighborhood that works very well. It's a rare example of modern architecture that's really appreciated by the people who live there. And I was jogging there and thought, oh, that's interesting and so on. And then I was asking myself, why have I never done anything on architecture, even though I'm so interested in architecture? And when I'm traveling, I'm mostly watching architecture, mostly contemporary architecture, or let's say 20th century architecture. And the answer I gave myself is, well, there's no one or no subject that's attracting me so much. But then I recalled that I read an interview with an Indian architect. I'd forgotten the name, but that interview fascinated me a lot. And so I thought, wow, this Indian guy, he was really interesting. Maybe that's a subject. And so I read the interview again and started doing some research on Doshi, and was so impressed that I wrote him. And so, yeah, I ended up in Ahmedabad.
Ah, I see. So music and visual arts. I'm taking a completely sidebar before we go further deeper into this. What is your practice about? Why do you only work in these certain artistic disciplines with your film? What is your quest here as a filmmaker?
Well, there's several approaches. When I'm doing documentaries, it's mostly on music and mostly on European classical music. That's the most important part of my life. I just love music, and I'm a musician myself. I play the piano, and this is what I want to spend my time with. And I'm also staging opera sometimes. And so when I do films on music, this is just very close to me, and I want to be close to music and to convey what I love in music in some ways, and of course also the musicians involved and so on.
Let's just do a little more sidebar there. You said, and I read in your wiki page, basically, and you just said you stage operas. What does that mean? You design them and produce them and make them happen? Is that what that means?
No. I'm just, sometimes I'm hired as a director, so I'm directing at opera houses. I'm responsible of the stage.
So you produce, so you make. You're the main person putting operas together. That's like doing architecture, is it not? In some ways.
Yeah, I mean it's also a huge teamwork, and it's a bit different than films, because in films, of course, when you shoot, you have your team, and that's very concentrated. But before, there's a long period of developing, of financing, of thinking. And that's very lonely. And in opera, it's different, because this is you don't have much time. You have 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks, and everybody's focused on the opening day, and so you are very fast. And I love that in this process. And this loneliness in making films is sometimes a bit sad.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It feels like, it's like a construction site, the production of an opera. You got a schedule, you got a budget, you got to line all that up, and then boom, it has to go.
Exactly.
Fascinating. But let's turn now a little bit more to your film and Doshi. The film is entitled The Promise. The Promise.
Yes.
What was the promise?
Yeah, I was thinking about how to call this film, and I had many candidates for the title, and for instance, architecture storytelling or liquid architecture. Some quotes from the film. I mean, he's really coining beautiful expressions, Doshi. But for me, this all sounded too academic and too much like a coffee table book, but not like a film. And then I was lucky that a friend of mine who watched it when it was almost finished with the film, he said, you have to call it The Promise. Because in the middle of the film, Doshi tells a story that as a young boy at I don't know, 8 or 10, he was asked in school to write an essay about what he would like to do when he was grown up. And he said, I want to do furniture for the poorest people, very cheap furniture that everyone can afford. And then he went on and said, this promise I still have to fulfill, or something like that. And in a way he did. I mean, he didn't have to fulfill it anymore. He actually fulfilled it with his architecture, with projects like Aranya and so on.
Okay. So you see your film, I'm just extrapolating, you see your film in a sense as a documentation of the fulfillment of the promise, and not a kind of an unfinished promise as he articulated it.
Yes, very nice way to put it. I agree.
Let's see. So what was it like working with Doshi? I mean, he was already, what years did you film this? He must be quite old already at that point.
Yes, he was very old. He was very old. When I was jogging, when I had this idea, that was in 2019, and then I wrote to him, and I visited him very few months after that. I think I wrote to him in March or so, and in July I went to Ahmedabad, and he received me very, very kindly, and we decided to do this. And normally after that, it takes years, and that's always a bit frustrating for the people that you try to win for a project, because they then think we'd start next week. But I normally have to tell them, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm very happy that you're collaborating, but now I have to raise the money, and that can take ages. Yeah. Then he was 91 when I visited him, and I thought, I mean, he was in perfect shape. I mean, he was amazing, but still, it was some age, and I thought I have to hurry up. And so I was lucky to find a friend who, right when I came back to Germany from Ahmedabad, I met a friend who was a great lover of architecture and asked him whether he could help me. And he said, okay, he will co-finance this film. So I could, and then I got some subsidies and so on. And so I put it up in a very short time. And already in September, we started. So then he was 92.
Wow. So if you don't mind, can I ask, like, how much does a film like this cost?
Of course, it costs, this film cost about 280,000 euros, more or less. I'm not sure about the exact number, but something like that.
So how does the economics work? So these are basically grants you get, or do you make a return on this?
Well, normally you shouldn't start doing a film like this, at least not in Europe, without having important partners like TV channels on board. Because when you try to sell it later, you will get much less as what you will get when you approach them before you start shooting. It's strange. It's about the factor 10 or so what you get. And so I really warn everyone not to go and film and hope that he will sell it later. He will not. I mean, he may, but then he will get $1,000 from Finland and 6,000 from Sweden, and yeah, that's what they used to pay. So it's quite frustrating. But I did the same mistake in this case because I wanted to hurry up, so I couldn't find a substantial partner from a TV station or so. And I was lucky with this friend, and I got subsidies in Germany and in many European countries. We have nice, really substantial subsidies for art house films, and I got it. So then it was okay.
All right. Well, that's the great thing about Europe, that there is a lot of support for production of things like this. It's so much more difficult here in the United States. So Doshi, 91, 92 years old, and I saw in the film there was somebody, they're always walking behind him, trying to make sure he doesn't fall as he's walking through the bazaars and, Prema Bhai Hall and all those spaces. Yeah. I noticed that, but as usual, Doshi, I gotta go.
His family wanted that. They said, you can do whatever you want, of course, but we want someone to take care. So there was always one of his daughters in the film. Several times you see the two of his daughters and this nice guy who is his driver.
Right. Yeah, that was a very interesting moment in the film. I think when you went to the Atira campus, the Ahmedabad Textile Institute Research Association's building, which the main building, I think, is by Kanvinde. But you went into there and you were looking for one of his earliest projects, which was kind of lost in the overgrown brush over there. Was that an accident, or was it planned, or how did that come about? I thought that was a very interesting scene.
Yes, well, this saying Hitchcock said in fiction films, the director is God. And some people say that in documentaries, God is the director. And I don't agree entirely, because of course you have to work and live with what you get by accident, but you can also manipulate it a bit. So it's a mix of anticipation and reaction to what happens. And in this case, he told us about this very, very early project. And I said, oh, wow, that sounds interesting. And I knew very little about it because there were not many photographs. And they said, yeah, let's go there. And he wasn't so interested to go there because, I mean, it's early and that's why it's dear to him, but it wasn't so important from the architectural point of view. But he agreed, and then we went there. And then I was lucky that he didn't find it. So that, of course, gave some juice to the film, because he was looking for this very early building. And one of the reasons he couldn't find it was really because nature had conquered it back. So it was almost invisible. Some of these buildings were really completely covered by plants. And that's why he didn't find it. And that it was a nice symbol for that also fits with his philosophy, that it's a cyclic way of considering life, and that it's not just going up and up and up and up and up, as we in Western Europe think. And that's why I put it at the end of the film, that he's going back to his youth project and not really finding it. And at the end, he finds it, and it's almost not recognizable anymore because it's in a very bad state. But he didn't mind. He still kept his good sense of humor and his good spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I thought in a sense you were trying to emphasize that adaptive reuse character, because when you went to Aranya, when you went to his low-cost housing project, you also spent quite a lot of time with the residents, giving them voice, letting them speak, a lot of time interviewing them, and then building up that idea that the architect sort of starts the work, but life takes over, and that's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, I thought there was a parallel between Aranya and the overgrown nature or brush around the Atira project, which, by the way, I had also no idea about until your film.
Yes. No, absolutely. And this is one of the ideas that were clear from early on, that I would need to include the inhabitants of the buildings, because Doshi is so much considering everything from the standpoint of the user, let's say. And that's his first approach. How does the human being live there, and how does he experience the architecture? And so I knew I wouldn't do beautiful pictures of empty buildings like for a coffee table book, but show buildings that live through their inhabitants. And then in Aranya, it was especially important because this project was to a great part built by the inhabitants themselves. So he designed some model buildings, but then he let them do whatever they wanted, and they did many things that he would never have designed, but he was cool about it.
Right. It's a double-edged sword, can go in any direction. I'm not sure if this came up in your conversation, but, of course, one of his iconic projects is the CEPT campus, the School of Architecture that he designed in Ahmedabad, and you filmed there, him standing in front of a blackboard, teaching again. But that visit to CEPT with all the people gathered around him, that beautiful picture that you staged, I don't think he goes to CEPT very often, or never went to CEPT last 10, 15 years.
He hadn't been there for quite a while. I think he stopped teaching there in 2014, which anyway was very late, and he did it very long, for more than 50 years. But then he hadn't come a lot. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't planned. I mean, we planned it, but the university didn't know that he was coming. And so they were all super surprised, and all these students showed up from somewhere and said, "Oh, Doshi is there." So that was not staged. It just happened.
Yeah, there is a lot of controversy about how that campus developed after Doshi kind of left it. So all I was saying was that, sometimes things go well, sometimes things don't go well when life takes over. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I was surprised you were able to persuade him to go to CEPT to film. I think that was.
That wasn't difficult.
Really?
It's interesting that you see like that, because it wasn't difficult at all. No, for him it's a major project. Not only this building as a building, but the whole project of this university. I mean, it's one of his dearest projects.
Yes.
But I didn't know about the later developments, and he didn't mention it.
He didn't mention it. No, that's good.
No,
that's good.
He did not.
That's good, because it's a controversial story. I also thought an interesting moment in the film was when he was doing his story about Sangha, that story he tells about you come here and then you don't find the way, you go up the steps and then you're looking for the front door, and then there is no front door, then you have to go around and around and around all these false starts, which is a story I first heard him tell at a conference in Chandigarh that I organized in 95, I think. But it was funny. He briefly remarked that one door was actually open.
Yes. Yes, and he was a very good sportsman and just continued and pretended the door was closed.
Yeah, that was such a funny moment. As architects, we totally get it, that the door can be open, but we know it's closed. But I wondered what you thought of it. Did you just thought it was funny and it's fine? Or...
Well, of course, when it happened, I thought, how can I use this? Do we have to cut around that? But then later I thought, well, everyone will get the idea. It's fine. And it's even funny how he deals with that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole story is beautiful. I've been told that he told this story many, many times, but I, of course, didn't know. And for us, it was fresh, and it looks fresh. And normally he just told it as a story, but here in the film, or for us, he actually performed it, because he played this visitor who didn't find the entrance himself.
Yes,
And
yes.
he tells it. And then in the film, we cut it together with a scene where he explains his concept of architecture as storytelling, and that these experiences that the spectators make when they walk around, and when they're misguided, and when they don't find the entrance, that this is intended by him, and that is how he wanted it to take place. So it's very interesting and very important for his conception of architecture.
There are a series of false starts that actually are telling you the lead up to the actual event. Yeah. It's a very narrative approach to architecture versus a much more mechanistic approach, which is based on efficiency and clarity. And I thought that was picked up very nicely also in your filming of IIM in Bangalore. And this idea of all kinds of possibilities of movement through space and the ambiguity of in-between spaces. I thought there was a good parallel between the reading of Sangat and IIM in Bangalore.
Yeah, he told us similar stories, and for me, really, this was an eye opener with regard to the IIM in Bangalore. He said there may be chance encounters between a professor and a student, and they may sit down here in that cafe and they will discuss something, and the student will miss his lecture, but this chance encounter with the professor might be much more important for his future life than the lecture that he's missing. And that is always how he approached projects, and I find that very, very beautiful. This beautiful story that he told about the Sept building, where he says he thought of Indian movies where the boy and the girl walk around the trees and find themselves on the other side of the tree. And he thought there will be students who fall in love, and so they have to do that. And that's why he designed 2 staircases, because then one can come from one and go up the other one, and so they can turn around there and have this game. I mean, who thinks of that when he designs a university?
Yeah, I know. I had never heard that story. I know those 2 staircases really well, but I had not heard that story. That's a great story. Very interesting. But another theme that kind of runs through the film is Corbusier.
Yeah.
You start off with Corbusier, which makes sense. Doshi's story always starts off with Corbusier in some way or the other. And I'm very familiar with, I've written several books on Corbusier and Schmidt-Garre, as you know. But then you end with Corbusier as well. Doesn't it end with, in the end, Doshi comes, you come back there with Doshi saying something? No?
Maybe he is mentioning him again, but I mean, yes, late, not at the end of the film, but in this scene, in this IIM scene, no, in this Sangat scene, he's standing, which is actually taking place at his home. He's standing at this drawing board and says, "This is the drawing board where Corbusier worked, and I kept it as a memory, and it always reminds me of my dear teacher." And that's very sweet, because he says, and I imagine always when I'm working here, I think of the old man wherever he is watching me, which is so nice, because he himself is such an old man when he says that, but then he transforms to a student.
Yeah. And I thought I picked up a narrative there as if Doshi was still, in a sense, working for Corbusier. This is another story that Doshi used to tell many times, that when Corbusier died in 1965, he went to Philadelphia to meet Louis Kahn. And Louis Kahn, as usual, threw his key down to Doshi. He came up, and Kahn was in tears. And he said, "Who will I design for now?" Although Louis Kahn only met Corbusier 1 or 2 times, conceptually, he was always designing in his head for Corbusier.
Yeah, he told us that story also. It
He told you that story.
In the film, but beautiful story.
It's a beautiful story. But I thought that was repeated in what Doshi said in the end, as if he was also still designing for Corbusier.
Yeah, true. It's true. Yes. Yeah. No, he was really. I think he thought of Corbusier every day, and he really
Yeah.
regarded him as some invisible guest who judged what he was doing and he was doing right or not.
As a guru.
Yeah, that's what he says.
That's what he says. And this is a very interesting theme of the guru and Le Corbusier as the guru in India, which runs through a lot of architects, including my father would refer to him as a guru until the end of his life. And it's a funny thing from a post-colonial perspective to be having these great old men as gurus still running around in the imagination.
Yes, of course. I'm sure that in a younger generation they have different opinions about those people.
Yeah, it's difficult I don't find many architects referring to Corbusier as guru nowadays. Even old timers, even like Tadao Ando will go on about the greatness of Corbusier, but he will still keep him at arm's length. But anyway, so those are several of the narratives that I wanted to talk to you about in the film. But so you do opera, you are a musician, you're a filmmaker, and this was one of your first deep dives into architecture and working with an architect. Yeah. What did you take away about architecture from the making of this film?
This idea of storytelling, that was really so amazing for me, and I'd never approached architecture like that, and I hadn't heard that someone was thinking like that, and that he was really starting with a person who was walking through these rooms and making experiences, and that from that you design architecture. I had a very traditional idea of architecture. It was more like the modernist view, like what people like Mies van der Rohe or Frank Lloyd Wright thought, that they were trying to build perfect sculptures, and the user and the people who were supposed to live there were mostly, especially for Frank Lloyd Wright, disturbing and damaging his pure vision. And he really reversed this entirely, and we talked about that didn't end up in the film either, unfortunately, but it didn't work for some reasons. And because we had this discussion, as I said, it's so interesting when I think of the early modernists, like those people, and they're building sculptures, and you also started like that, because when you think of an early building like the Institute of Indology, that's also one of these perfect sculptures, and it looks very beautiful. And that one we also filmed without people. But then he changed his attitude entirely. And in the IIM in Bangalore, that was a very open project that is like, he compares it to an Indian temple, and says every new generation builds a new component here and there and so on. So it's growing in a very unpredictable way. That's what I said. And then he said, well, in Aranya, I went even further, because there I handed it to the people who live there, and went back, left it over to them to do whatever they wanted. And I think that's a very important step. And it's really maybe the big step. I'm not an architecture historian at all, but the big step in the notion of architecture in the 20th century. So that was very impressive for me.
I wonder if you read a little bit in the film, but not much, whether you got a sense of the spiritual quest in Doshi's work, or sort of a search for the inexpressible or something like that.
Yes.
Did he talk a lot about that?
Many times he said a beautiful sentence that also is in the film in one moment. He says he regards architecture as the spiritualization of matter. And this is something that I always thought about all forms of art and especially of music, that it's really a spiritualization and the transformation of matter, and that doesn't always work, and it only works when it's flying and when it's coming to this other sphere, this spiritual sphere. And I was very happy that he was thinking like that. And apart from that, he didn't mention the spiritual dimensions so often. Maybe it was really very natural to him and very present. And we filmed his yoga practice. And that also shows his connection to, it's also kind of spiritualization of matter. The matter is the body. And so it was, and all his prayers and his religious life was so natural to him that he didn't need to talk a lot about it.
Yeah. Did you read his autobiography by any chance before the film, A Path Uncharted? Did you read that?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yes.
But my reading of it suggested that the spiritual quest for something unknown was quite big. Like, for instance, did you notice that, he talks a lot about his mother in the book,
Yes.
who passed away when he was really young. And he talks about her as if she was alive throughout his life.
Yes.
And the book is even dedicated to her.
Yeah, I raised that question. I hoped he would tell us something like that, but he didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't think that he regarded it as too intimate or personal, because that was not his concern. But I don't know. He doesn't like to repeat himself, even though there are some stories he tells many times. But in our conversations, he didn't want to repeat himself. And sometimes he told stories not so well. So I tried the other day to get it again, and he wouldn't do that. And
I see. I mean, how did you see this sort of axis? On the one hand, architecture moving, what did you call it? The spiritualization of matter, right? It's an aesthetic, almost abstraction of matter.
mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, there's architecture as very ordinary and everyday place to be inhabited by regular people who transform it and use it to whatever end they want to use it. These are two different axes of architecture. All right.
Yes. What would he answer?
Or how did you see it in the film? Let's stay with the film.
I don't know how to answer here. When I think of Aranya, those people really did some very, very ugly things with his model houses, and they added some awful little walls with columns and balconies that are really the baddest taste that you can imagine. And of course, then the spiritualization of this matter is, let's say, difficult. But he would say it's more important that these people are happy there, and that their life has improved a lot, which it of course did, and that also has some justification, maybe even the higher one. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a difficult duality, which is endemic to modern architecture in general. How to sort of spiritualize or aestheticize or make ineffable matter, while also thinking of architecture as a, very pragmatic, quotidian, service-oriented, people-turned, and big money institute. So, but I guess it applies to everything, any big industry. Film, your business, film is very much like that.
I'm just thinking about how what happens with my own films. So when I'm editing a film, in this process, I'm coming closer and closer and closer to some ideal and some idea of perfection, and to the perfect result. I try to, and then there is an opening night, and you have a cinema, and then you check that the projection is good, and the colors are right, and that the it's not too bright and not too dark, and everything, and the sound quality, and it's a big thing, and then maybe on the opening night everything is fine, and it's really the perfect projection, and that's how this film should be watched. And then see it again a month later in another theater, and they don't have their projector so nicely tuned, so it looks a bit different. And first, this is horrible, and you think, oh, I can't show it like this. And after some month, you get more relaxed and you think, okay, that's live. Films are shown like this and like that, and at the end, many people will watch it on their cell phone in the subway or whatever. Of course, that's not what I intend in the first place, but then it's also fine, and then the message transforms to something else. It's not this perfect sculpture again, but it's maybe something more, something finer, deeper, encapsulated in the film that comes out, and that's maybe more important than the perfect projection. And with stage productions the same. In the opening night, every detail is perfect, and every singer does exactly what I want him, and in the very second one when I want him, and then a few weeks later or some month later, he's sick and someone else has to jump in the last second, and the assistant director explains him, there you come from there and you have to go there, and this is important and don't miss that, and apart from that, just try to do it, and that can be an amazing night. And
it can be.
So this ideal of perfection is transforming in the process.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, perfection and improvisation perhaps are not opposed.
Yeah,
sort of two aspects of the same thing. In a paradoxical way.
Yes, but you need to be this very relaxed person like Doshi was, who really loved people and who was always open to what happened in the moment. When the way he described Louis Kahn, for instance, he seems to have been quite different from that. Not so flexible.
So it seems. I'm also having a conversation. I hope to have a conversation with Nathaniel Kahn. They just re-released or remastered My Architect. So and it's a great scene with Doshi.
Yes, and very, very characteristic of Doshi, because in that scene he's very compassionate with Nathaniel Kahn.
Yes.
And saying, oh yeah, I see you have these problems and you are going this path, and I hope this will end up well. And it's very, very sweet.
Yes. In a sense, he's the only one who got what Nathaniel Kahn was trying to do in that film.
And it's beautiful that you put it in it.
Yes. I think it's a pivotal moment in the film, and Kahn, Nathaniel Kahn articulates it as such. Okay, so that's it. So moving ahead, do you plan to do more films on architecture, or this is
right now? I don't. No. I plan a film that is somehow it has to do with Doshi, because when I was in Ahmedabad the last time, that was in July 22, because I showed the film to Doshi. And that was 6 months before he died. And his granddaughter said, if you want to show it to him, you may hurry up and please come now, because I wanted to come in winter, because it's much nicer in Ahmedabad in winter, and in July it's really horrible. But so I went there, of course, and showed it to him. And when I was there, I read some newspaper and read about an initiative in Nigeria that interested me a lot, and it's in Nigeria. There's in Lagos. There's a chess player, a chess champion, young man. He's 29, and he comes from the slums, from the slum of one of the slums of Lagos. And as a child, by chance, he learned chess and turned out to be very gifted and won tournaments and could all of a sudden he could bring money home to his family and they were surprised that someone can make money with playing chess. And then he had a career as a chess master in Nigeria. And then he started teaching children from the slums chess. And that's transforming these children in a really amazing way. And this has evolved to an initiative called Chess in Slums, which is really fantastic. And I want to do a film about that. And when I read this in Ahmedabad, I thought, in a way, this is familiar to the Aranya project that Doshi did.
Yeah.
And I told this
So,
to this guy from Lagos, and he thought, well, that's an interesting approach. But yeah, maybe you're right.
mm. Okay, so final question. What are you hoping will be the impact of this film? Like, what is your aspiration for this film in the world? What do you think comes out of it?
You know, I'm a filmmaker, so my first intention always is to make a good film. I don't have a message in that sense. So it's not that I want to inform people about Vivi Doshi, about or his beautiful buildings. Because there are books, there's Wikipedia. You can get all the facts within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So when I do a film, I want to create an experience. As Doshi tells it with his architecture, I really want in these 90 minutes, which is not much time, I want the audience to really, to have an experience. And I showed the film again on Saturday, so just a few days ago, and I hadn't seen it for a while. So I was also in the theater, and there was a lady afterwards. Who came to me and said, now I have the feeling I really met Mr. Doshi himself. It's like he was a family or a friend or something. And this is what I want. I really want to allow people to make this experience.
Wonderful. Thank you for making the film, Jan. It's a beautiful film. Congratulations again. And thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Mary Lee. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.